When I was prepping for this conference, and we as well, we tried to answer the question as to what has an impact on the current situation there and what could be further developments in the world economy. So we opted for looking onto these 3 points of the agenda, which are relevant not just for the industry, but for the context of our relations going forward. So those are the points. Is global political instability gaining ground? How it impacts the business? The next topic, which is of concern for many now, is China-US trade war and its implications for the world industry. And the last but not least is anti-Russian sanctions in the ONG segment, boon or bane. That is important not just for the petchems but other industries as well. And we'll get more practical with that. We'll focus on the strategies of import substitution and localization. In the context of trends worldwide, we do see that all the achievements of the recent 20 years and the strive to get global are being rewinded. There is the gaining weight of nationalist movements, and basically the local policies become dominant in many regions, which has an impact on the overall economic situation and the strategy and the business segment at large. What is the manifestation of this nationalist, anti-globalist agenda? In the recent years, the number of measures which various sovereign states adopted, according to recent estimates, is about 14,000. First and foremost, that targets preferences for public purchases to local companies. Another important point in the agenda of many nations, that is the policy of import substitution and also localization of production facilities of foreign companies. Another important consideration which deserves mentioning is the impact of changes in the system of trade relations. On the one hand, there are trade wars. On the other hand, there is an impact of the weight of even the strongest trade organization. Well, in parallel with that, we see the growing weight of regional trade associations. One of the brightest examples is Asia. They focus very much on strengthening internal economic relations in the region at large and development of infrastructural projects, thus sustaining the economic environment in Asia specifically. And that means that businesses should operate in the environment which most likely will be dominated by various standards within the scope of various regional agreements. And the understanding of that will be much more important than in former days. We do conduct on a regular basis surveys amongst foreign investors, and based on our recent one we did last year involving managers from 500 companies with revenues of more than $500 million, and we see the trend in many companies in the development of their localization strategy. 90% of investors tell us that their companies are pursuing localization or considering doing so, and they are basically getting synchronized with the policies dominant in their operating environments. What that means for businesses. Those are 4 risks we have outlined within our research and analytics. But those are also opportunities. But the key one is the need to change business models. When sovereign state policies and the policies of interaction with the world community is getting weaker, it is important to do the right job of doing the strategy of local interaction, which tells us that we have to fit within the local political agenda in our areas of presence. We need to get linked up with the local community. We need to tailor-make our products, meeting the requirements in the local market, which alters the approach to globalization. So the motto, think global and act local, is very important. Those businesses which would fail to adjust to the changing environment and infrastructure, unfortunately, risk losing their efficiency and productivity. Most likely, economic downturn in various markets will be of more concern for them than for other players who would be more successful, and that would slow down the overall growth. Even though, according to the recent forecast of the World Bank, there is the slowdown of growth rates almost everywhere. The key point is how well we're doing in terms of adjustment, and most likely it will lead to decentralization strategies developing. Now going to the trade war considerations between US and China. A lot is being said on and around that, and the consequences for the petrochemical industry could be manifold. We were trying to explore the export flows with the US. The US is a large importer, and it's clear, but in the petchems, the situation is very much different. Currently, US is 100% locally supplied, and external markets for the states in terms of petchems are very important source of revenue. $1.8 billion is going to China. That is 1.5 of the total production, and 10% of products are exported to China. In terms of feedstock balances, China now is 30% import dependent. First and foremost, the feedstock is represented by propane, and that dependency will grow even higher going forward. The US covers 1/4 of that demand. Should changes occur in the trade system and trade relations between the two nations and tariffs increase, most likely China will probe for new sources of feedstock. The beneficiary, as we believe, of this kind of developments will be Middle Eastern nations. But that could possibly lead to feedstock prices increasing in the global markets. In terms of final products, in this domain, the situation is subject to the discussion as to what might happen going forward. China, as I said, now US now is fully self-sufficient, and export volumes grow quite fast. And nowadays, the share of exports of final products, in this case polyethylene to China, is quite modest. It is expected that going forward, it could increase much more as opposed to other export destinations. And the US, having a lot of cheap feedstock available, has lots of plans to expand their production capacities. And again, the question which will be difficult to answer. There are two ways of developments, two scenarios. One is cutting out the plans of additional capacities creation in the States, and the second option, which is more realistic, is the US using, and they do know how to do that, the US flexing their political muscle and push onto their trade partners and export final products. In terms of development scenarios, most likely there is the neutral one, confirmed by latest statements by Donald Trump. Most likely the parties will come to an agreement, and current measures which have already been implemented most likely will still be there. Perhaps part of the tariffs will be lifted, but the situation will not change drastically in our understanding, because China follows the policy of local supply and import substitution. So despite the promise of opening their markets, we cannot be assured that export from the US would grow to China. What it would lead to globally is a good question. And the statements by Donald Trump are changing from day to day. But we do hope that the situation will develop in the current key and the current trade balances will be sustainable. But insofar, the situation is not predictable. Now let's look onto the region of Russia. As a matter of fact, and this is what it is, the level of FDI in Russia is shrinking from year to year. The lowermost level was in 2015, but recent reports demonstrate the decrease in the FDI inflows. And against that background, well, by the way, the story is about right. We can really resort to import substitution and foster local production developments. We have high targets in terms of import substitution in quite a number of industries. But as a matter of fact, the plans which had been established will not be met next year. That is unrealistic. In the oil and gas, in the mechanical engineering industry, it's even worse. But it's difficult to say that we are very successful in terms of import substitution and development of local capacities of supply. According to the recent research by the Center of Analytical Research of the Higher School of Economics, we see that against the trend of stabilization of the FX rate to the ruble, the share of companies that actively switch to Russian machinery is shrinking. I am primarily involved in projects of enhancement of operational efficiency, that is cost cutting, but cost cutting in a smart way based on the overall cost of ownership. And we talk a lot with suppliers, vendors, and our customers. And customers always complain of the following. Well, they say, you see, there is a low level of technology available, low quality, monopolization in terms of equipment of various items, in terms of supply of spare parts, no service component, unsuccessful sales teams. At the same time, when you talk to Russian manufacturers, they say, well, of course they can complain about us, but unfortunately we're strangled by short-term contracts, inavailability of long-term planning scope, they are not making advance payments, and in this kind of situation it's a vicious circle. On one hand, we do not want, they do not want, and they cannot do that. There are lots of procedures they have to go through, including those requirements of electronic trade platforms and purchasing tenders. It's not the universal remedy. We need to address this issue from the structural way as to the improvement of interactions between the two parties. Insofar, I'm talking import substitution, and the same goes for the localization strategy. Very often we are cautious doing business with foreign suppliers because they don't have fabrication facilities in Russia, but we are not trying to talk and see how we can make it better for us localizing their manufacturing facilities in Russia. And I have the question for the audience. I will come to the next thing in my presentation, and that is the question for you. How many companies could you name having a clear structural program of localization and import substitution? Raise your hands if you know of any such companies. One person. Okay. Let us now look at the following as to what needs to be done. Since I'm also in the area of operational efficiency, I have cross-industry experience. I have a lot of clients in the pharmaceutical industry. For the most part, those are foreign companies, which has been working on a systemic basis at the level of GR and Russian manufacturers in terms of partnering up, developing roadmaps for localization, and they do their PR very well at the government level to get involved and into the nationwide program of the Ministry of Healthcare, not just on the federal level, but on the regional level as well. And this is how it should look like from practical terms. If we want to get involved with that, and that is not only true for import substitution, but the localization as well. All in all, we have to see whether it is of strategic importance for us or not. It should be set in stone at the level, at the highest managerial level, and we need to assure support of further developments. Another important consideration in shaping up this kind of program is the assessment of suppliers. The concept of supplier and vendor management is not novel. This partnership concept is not novel, but what is new, and very often I see that clients are telling me, as a matter of fact, what we have is the post-audit at the level of impressions based on statistics of not meeting the deadlines for supply on claims. We don't have any real data on the operational parameters, and the entire system-wide assessment as to what the vendor, the supplier, gives us is very impeded because we are not keeping track of base parameters. And collection this kind of base data is an important step to develop this program. Next point is segmentation of suppliers. That's the story for the next slide. We need to be very clear about requirements to those, and depending on those, we would segment our suppliers. We would rank them up in terms of priority partners. And the last point is the design of interaction strategy that requires cross-functional team focusing on long-term objectives such as cost reduction, development of new products, offering new service solutions. There should be an action plan. So before we think on the program, we need to realize what kind of problem we are addressing, and we need to have a clear action plan. Sounds easy to do, but not as easy it is. Many are involved in chaotic attempts of assessing the impact of sanctions onto their entire park of equipment and machinery, which could be for the most part US made. So that's a point to think about. Now let's look at a specific example of interaction. We have come up with this kind of solution arrangement, and those are examples of 9 strategies of interaction with your potential vendors and suppliers. Usually there would be 2 axes, one reflecting on the economic efficiency, performance, and the strategic potential as to what could a supplier be to you or bring for you. But that is the question which is very seldom asked by companies seeking those suppliers and vendors. So we need to try to understand the prospects of doing business with such partners. To be honest, the key point and strategy of doing business with the partners is described by the word use. We do use their services or products, we are not happy, we get rid of them. So a part of strategy of using and disposing of, there are certain variations and specifics. And what relates to Russian suppliers is color-coded red. And there could be low quality and broken deadlines. The next step is the development program. We need to try to understand what prohibits them for doing things in a better way. Very often we go to their production capacities, their manufacturing sites, help them and to optimize the revenue. And the last point, sometimes companies get extinct, and that really happens. A client of mine said that 2 of their suppliers just went out of business, and that that is happening. Next point is going more innovative integration and joint innovation and prospective investments into new technology projects. Summing up, since I'm running out of time, I guess there would be two pieces of advice from me. Think about localizing your operational models, having in mind increasing economic instability. And the second point, if you want to do the job on a system basis and benefit consistently from doing the job with your partners, think about differentiated strategies and develop detailed action plans. Thank you.